Oh, Jesus. Hello? Oh, my bloody mother just rang me. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning for her. Not even. 6 o'clock in the morning. I was like, what do you want? Are you alright?
Blimey.
She's like, no, I just got up. I thought I'd ring you. I was like, don't talk to me. She never gets up.
Make you panic.
Totally panicked. I was like, someone's died. Not again. Hello, welcome to the Bookcast Club, a podcast for people who like to chat books. Today it's me, Sarah, coming to you from the Netherlands, and I'm joined by Jenny, who's coming to you from the UK, and Chris, coming to you from Indiana in the US. We're back for 2023 with a bunch of new episodes, so we've finished our little break that we have over Christmas, and we're coming back to you guys today to talk to you about our favourite books of last year, 2022. So I think we have 3 each, right, you guys? I didn't actually ask you, but I have 3.
Yeah, I got 3.
I got 3.
Beautiful. What did we decide? No reflections. We're moving on.
Moving on.
Yeah. Just focusing on the good things and...
Yeah. We all had, let's say, a fairly shoddy reading year last year, so we've decided unanimously to not reflect too much on 2022. We're moving on to bigger and brighter things, and we're just going to talk about our favourites, and we're not going to ruminate on how poor a reading year was last year. So do you want to start, Jen? Do you want to tell us about your number 1? Did you rank them, actually, first of all?
I haven't.
Can I push you to a ranking? Is that possible?
I can definitely do my least favourite first. I've talked about it before, and I'm surprised by this, actually. I've literally just kind of looked through my Goodreads list of what I read last year. I think this one's up there, and that is The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. I've definitely talked about this on the podcast before, maybe in a mid-year favourites episode, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. It was my favourite fiction of last year. It was between this and The Colony, and I feel like the story in this one's just stuck with me a bit more than The Colony did. It's a family saga, I guess. Would you call it an epic family saga? I don't know, but it's a family saga. My favourite kind of family saga. Lots of secrets, lies and deceit. But the main crux of it is a relationship between the main character, who I'm not going to remember the name of now, and her sort of childhood sweetheart. And all you know at the start is that they drifted apart and they're not together now, and she's married somebody else. And the whole book, and this isn't a spoiler, the whole book centres around their affair. As the book progresses, you kind of learn more about why they ultimately didn't end up together and the secrets that they're keeping. And I really, really enjoyed it. It really surprised me. I thought her writing was really good and her sense of place was really good. It's definitely a book to read in summer because the Paper Palace is the summer house that they go and stay at on Cape Cod. Yeah, and the whole kind of story is set in the summer because they go there every year, or they did when they were children anyway. And yeah, I just really, really liked it. As you know, I'm not opposed to a sexy sex scene in a book, and this is quite sexy, this book. So yeah, I enjoyed it and it stuck with me, and I can't really say that about a lot of the fiction that I've read this year. So yeah, I guess that was the biggest surprise for me, and I gave it's a 4 out of 5 stars. I did not give many 5 stars last year, but that's probably the highest 4-star rating that I gave.
That's on my summer TBR this year. I really want to get to it. I own it.
Yeah, I think you'd really like it, Chris.
Do you think I would like it, Jen?
You're not big on family sagas, are you? Or am I making wild statements?
I don't think so.
It's one of those ones I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, yeah, I haven't read super many. It does kind of intrigue me more than a lot of the classic family sagas do, so I'm sort of interested in it. Maybe I'll take the plunge.
It's a quick read.
Is it? Because it's pretty large.
You could always give it a start and then...
Yeah, I mean, I can DNF. I don't know why I'm umming and ahhing. Like, it's such a huge commitment. Can I read 50 pages? Yeah, I should give it a go. Because it does sound interesting. Every time someone describes it, I am intrigued by it, but it's just not at all the kind of book that I would normally read. But that shouldn't put you off, I don't think, if it sounds good. What's your number 3, Chris? Are you able to rank?
Yeah, I can give them like kind of a rough ranking, I guess. My number 3 would probably be In the Woods by Tana French. So this is a crime novel. It's in her Dublin Murder Squad series, which I plan to read the rest of the books in because I really enjoyed this. And I think that each of the books actually follows a different character in that squad, so it's not like the kind of traditional detective series where you're following the same detective as they solve case after case, but instead you're following like a group of detectives who all work in the same bureau. And this one, you're following a character named Rob Ryan, who when he was a child, him and 2 of his friends were kidnapped, and his friends did not survive the kidnapping. They never found his friends' bodies, but they found him in the woods afterward with a whole bunch of his friends' blood pooled in his shoes. So it's very much assumed that these children died, and he has no memory of the event whatsoever. He's gone on to kind of build a life for himself afterward and kind of hide what's happened to him in his adult years, and he became a murder detective and made it to the Dublin Murder Squad. Like I said, he's changed his name and he's hidden his identity, so his superiors don't know that this has happened to him, and he's forced to revisit these memories when a young woman is found at the outskirts of the same woods that he disappeared in several years ago. She's found near an archaeological dig site. He feels that he might have to kind of confront these memories and try and remember what happened to him in these woods in order to solve this mystery. And it's really interesting. The writing is really elevated. It definitely feels like her attention just to the sentence by sentence prose is just a lot more superior than a lot of other crime novels. It feels almost like a literary fiction in just how kind of carefully paced and how character focused it is. And it really takes its time developing this relationship between Rob and his partner Cassie. And they have this really beautiful friendship that just gets really tested to the limits by what happens in this book. It's exciting, it's thrilling, it kept me guessing, kept me reading well past my bedtime. It's just a really great crime novel, and I'm really excited to have found crime fiction again that's made me this excited about the genre.
You may or may not remember, in the November Patreon episode, I think, Jen and I were talking about this series, and we were trying to figure out if you can read them out of order. What's your take on this? Because the internet said yes, but...
As somebody who's only read the very first book, I can't really give an educated opinion about that. I know that the second book, I believe, follows the perspective of Cassie. So if you read that book and you haven't read all the things that happened between her and Rob in the first book, I don't know how much that will affect, because I don't know what exactly it follows with her. I would say, in general, I'm always a fan of just reading books in publication order. I usually am of the opinion that if it was published that way, there was probably some sort of intentionality behind it.
I rather erroneously got out the Secret Place, I think it's called, from the library, which is, I think, the 5th one or something. And because it was obviously because it's so far down the line, I was like, do I really have to go back and read 4 books? But yeah, I haven't read it, so I think I will. But I really want to read this series anyway, so I guess I'll try and read that at some point this year, because, yeah, you really made me interested in them. They sound really good.
Yeah, it's really good. I think you will know whether or not you're going to like it just by the opening few pages, because the opening few pages detail in quite poetic language how these young children were kidnapped, or at least an idea of it, right? Because of course nobody knows exactly, but it kind of gives you the flitting images of it, and it's really quite stunning. If you like that writing style it presents, you're probably going to like the whole book.
Yeah, I do find that with crime a lot, actually. I either really like it or I really don't. They all have a unique style. Often with crime, something that I don't like is I find them quite dialogue heavy, and I really don't like that. I don't like a lot of dialogue back and forth between police officers.
This is not dialogue heavy. It is not, no.
I was just going to say, I know I've definitely said this before, that Ben, as not a big reader, has actually read that book. And I know he really enjoyed it. And I know it's supposed to be really good, so it's a book that has survived many a bookshelf culling. So I really need to get round to it. You've sold it to me, Chris.
Maybe we could read together, Jen. Very unenthusiastic response to that.
Sorry. Could you hear a scream? Yes. You talk about yours. I might feed the screaming child. Yeah, okay. Hold on. I'll come in here and do it. I'll listen to what you're talking about. Yeah, go for it.
So my third book, no one cares about. My third is All the Acorns on the Forest Floor by Kim Hooper. This is a short story collection that I read really early in the year last year, actually. And they're interconnected short stories, kind of similar in style, I guess, to sort of Bernardine Evaristo, I guess, or David Mitchell, those kind of writers. And they're all short stories about parenthood or motherhood, one way or the other, and they're about people who meet each other in life, just sort of strangers who bump into each other. And what normally happens in each story is that it's some kind of, normally about pregnancy or childbirth, they have some kind of interaction with a stranger which really puts them off, or interaction with a family member that really puts them off. Maybe someone says something to their child or says something about their own pregnancy or about childbirth, and they walk away like really upset and really bewildered why someone would say something like that, why someone would say something about your parenting, or why someone would say something about your own personal decisions about childbirth or whatever. And then it changes perspective in the next story or a few stories later to that person who made the comment or who said something that was upsetting, and you learn more about their context. So like, for example, one of the short stories is about a woman who gives birth in hospital, and the midwife is really rude, and she is really, really upset by this and can't understand why the midwife is so rude to her. And then later it goes to the perspective of the midwife, and it turns out that the midwife is really desperate to have a child but is not able to have one, and she sort of at work, it tortures herself all day, every day, helping people birth or whatever it's called, helping people give birth and have children when it's like all she wants in the world, and it's like the one thing she can't have, really. It's a really very, very delicate book. It's not super preachy. It just is like telling stories of different people, what's happened to them and what makes them act and say things the way that they do. So I really recommend it. It does have quite a lot of content around like difficulty with childbirth, difficulty with pregnancy, content warnings for miscarriage and forced pregnancy and all that kind of thing. So if there's any kind of like sensitive issues for you around that, do be warned with the content of this book. But really, really recommend it. I really loved it.
I really want to read this.
You like short stories, don't you? Yeah, you love them.
Oh, yeah. I would love it.
I think now I'm past the childbirthing stage. I think I can read it now.
I think so. I definitely wouldn't have... if you'd started to read it last year, I would have been like, ah!
Stop.
Chris, do you want to do your number 2 while Jen's busy?
Absolutely. My number 2 is going to be The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So I've talked about this quite a few times on the podcast. So it opens up following the perspective of a man who's returning home from a funeral and decides to stop off in his childhood neighborhood and specifically go to the house of this family that used to live in the neighborhood. And they had this pond in the back of their house that they called the Ocean. And they were this kind of very mysterious family. Definitely got the sense that there was something magical going on with them. And meeting, finding this family again at the house forces him to kind of reconfront these childhood memories of his. In particular, at a time when his parents were renting out rooms in the house and one of their tenants killed themselves. And this seemed to kind of unleash these kind of dark things in his life afterward, including this forest spirit that takes the form of a nanny and intrudes on his life and seems to be kind of out to get this child. And he finds solace and protection with this family that lives at the end of the lane that has this ocean in their house. And they seem to almost be like immortal, like they've just been there forever. And I don't want to spoil too much about where it goes, but it's really quite an interesting look at memories and looking back on childhood. And this kind of sense that I definitely had as a child, that there were things in my life that seemed overwhelming and scary and frightening that the adults in my life didn't seem to take seriously because to them they weren't frightening things. And how sometimes that can just have this overwhelming, all-encompassing force in your life as a child. And it really examines that really interestingly, and it's really beautifully written, and yeah, it was just fantastic, and I can't wait to read more Neil Gaiman.
Is that your first Neil Gaiman, Chris?
'Twas indeed, yes.
Ah, interesting. I'd have thought you'd have read loads of Neil Gaiman.
I tried to read this book. I just checked my Goodreads to find out when this was, in 2014, so nearly 10 years ago. And I DNF'd it, and I really remember I really didn't like it. But I think I didn't understand it at the time. Yeah, I think I was not it wasn't the right book for me at that moment, so I really would like to reread it, because I just remember I think I thought it was boring. So I haven't actually read any Neil Gaiman since then, because I was like, well, I didn't like that book, but I think I would get a lot more out of it. I mean, I know this is not indicative of him as a writer, but I've been listening to him a bit because he does the preface or the introduction for a couple of audiobooks that I've been listening to. I'm like, oh, I really like him, so I need to give him another go. Cause...
Is he doing the preface for the Ellen Kushner books?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes into quite a lot of detail about why he chose to, because he directed the audiobooks for them. And they're quite immersive, like they have background noise and different actors and that kind of stuff. And he talks about like choices that he made in the audiobook, why he chose them, how he thought about it in terms of the story, and also like what the books mean to him. And I just really like the way he talked about them. I really like it.
not to like derail us completely, those are like audio books, not like audio dramas, right? Like they actually read every word that's in the book, right?
Yep, it's unabridged.
Okay, cool. Because I think if I were to ever, I DNF that book. If I were to ever revisit, I would revisit in audio and go specifically to that production because I've heard nothing but good things about it. And I think that would help me get through those.
Yeah, they're really good, especially the first one. So I'm listening to the second one at the moment, actually. And they're just very unique because they're this very interesting midpoint between like a full drama. Because full drama I actually find a bit too much. This
Same.
is just like moments. Maybe like one time per chapter he'll put in like noise. Like if there's a fight, he'll put a slamming door or something like that. But there's not loads of music. And there'll be music, I think it'll pass you or something. But it's not like constant. So it's very, very clever. I would say probably maybe 10 to 20% of the actual audiobook has background or something. So it's really not very much.
Is that The Fall of Kings that you're reading then or something like that?
It is called The Privilege of the Sword.
Is that the one that like it's following a girl, isn't it?
Yes. So the first one, Swords Point, is about two men. One is you introduced me to these books.
I did, I know. But I just can't remember. I mean, I DNF Swords Point, so.
Okay. That's funny. I read it because of you. Maybe you must have said that you were interested in reading it. I can't remember why.
Yeah, I think I had. Yeah.
Okay. Follow you blindly, Chris.
I think I had like read the first chapter of it at one point and like talked about how good the first chapter is, which it is. Like it opens up describing like this pool of blood on snow and it's just beautiful.
They're quite, what's the word I'm looking for? What is the word? Like almost Regency or something. They're not like super in depth. They're not super emotional. If you're into like Robin Hobb and you want to hear like Fitz's inner turmoil, that's not going to happen. They're much like more light, I guess, which sometimes I'm really, really in the mood for. So it's the kind of book that I would maybe only feel like reading like, yeah, on very few occasions. But right now I'm really enjoying it. But it's taken me a long time to get to the second one. It took me a long time to be in the right frame of mind, you know. But it's, yeah, just the kind of fantasy book that sometimes I really like. Why are we talking about this? I don't know.
Because of Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, eventually I will retry The Ocean at the End of the Limb. I'm also really interested to read American Gods. I think that sounds really good.
I know. I've got the version of it that like he souped up. It was like his director's cut version of the book, and I really want to read that one.
He's interesting. I like how creative he is.
I read it amazingly from the person who doesn't read fantasy. Yeah, I can't really remember it though, but I listened to it on audio. I remember enjoying it at the time. But if you ask me to recollect it, and actually I've watched the first season of the TV series as well. Yes, I still can't remember what it's about, so I don't know what that says.
Okay, so this is where we take a little break to tell you about all the different ways that you can support the podcast, some of which are totally free. A really effective and easy way of showing your support is by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. There is a link in the show notes that will take you straight to the Apple Podcast page where you can write a review. You can also share our posts on social media. We are at Bookcast Club on both Instagram and Twitter. We also have a free monthly newsletter which you can sign up to, where we share even more book recommendations and all the latest podcast news. And if you want to support the podcast financially, we also have a Patreon account. You can sign up for as little as £2 a month. We offer early access to the podcast, monthly bonus episodes, and our top tier will get you both of those things and personalized book recommendations, plus occasionally books in the post. There are over 15 bonus episodes that you can get instant access to if you sign up as a Patreon today. The link for that is in the show notes. But however you choose to show your support, we as always want to say a huge thank you. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and we're really looking forward to 2023 and bringing you a bunch of new episodes.
My last two are both memoirs, and it was a toss-up as to which one was my favourite, but I'm gonna go with this one next, and that was On Writing by Stephen King. I've been meaning to read this for ages, and as you know, I keep an Excel sheet of all the books I own and haven't read. And what I did last year is I pull random books off it, but then I actually just use some of my like audiobook credits just to buy them in audio format to get them read, because otherwise they'll sit there for another 10 years not being read. So I listened to this one, which is narrated by Stephen King, and I really enjoyed it. I knew I would. I don't know why I've put it off for so long, but it's almost his autobiography. I mean, it is, because it's his life told through writing, but I mean, his troubles with alcohol and drugs are quite well known, and I'd say he doesn't particularly delve into that side of his life that much. If you want like a tell-all expose on his time taking narcotics, and you're not going to get it. But he does touch on it, and he talks about his writing at the time and his writing afterwards, and he talks all about his craft and how he does it, and he's very generous with his opinions. I hadn't realised that he'd had like a very near-death experience. He was hit by a car. I didn't know this at all. This seems to, when I've looked it up, I'm like, oh, this is quite a famous incident.
Yeah, because doesn't it then make it to one of his books, I think?
Oh, maybe, yeah. I mean, he probably says.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in one of his books there's a writer who is hit by a car, and it's like his own story.
In Misery, the guy crashes his car. So I can't remember. My memory's awful. Like, read a book, straight in, straight out. But I hadn't even realised he'd been in this like accident, and he was very nearly killed. Like, he describes his injuries, and he really is lucky to be alive. But I just thought it was brilliant, and he's really good. And he particularly talks about the fact that if you want to be a writer, then you should be a reader as well. And Chris will know that there was Twitter drama last year around writers and reading, and discord around the fact that people believe that you can still be a good writer without reading other writers' writing. I just read it all from a distance. I didn't get involved. But Stephen King is a very firm believer that you cannot be a good writer if you don't read broadly. But yeah, I really loved it. It's really good. You don't need to be a writer to read it. It's probably the main point I'd share.
Well, it's good to know that Stephen King was on the correct side of the discourse.
Would you mind summarising this? What was it?
Come on, Chris.
Oh my god. There's been several instances of it. I mean, the one was when I was Twitter Villain of the Day on SFF Twitter, because I had the audacity to say that if you want to, like, write science fiction fantasy or all this different stuff, you should probably, like, read the classics in the genre. You need to have a good idea of the history of the genre. People lost their minds. It was an intense week of my life. And people just don't think that you have to, like, read to write well. And it's just kind of shocking how many people have this opinion and are just, like, proudly on twitter.com being like, I don't read, and that's good. While they're trying to write books. So
yeah, it's crazy.
It's just insane to me that people feel confident even saying such things. It's just like, what is wrong with you?
I remember there was one YA writer. I'm going to cut out the name because I think it was who, like, doesn't read at all, right?
Oh, really?
Oh, I don't know, but that would not surprise me. There was one recently who, like, wrote a retelling of the Odyssey and just was proudly admitting that she had never actually read the Odyssey.
Go away. Don't talk to me. Okay, my number 2 book of last year is New Animal by Ella Baxter, which I read, I think, around October last year. It's a short book fiction. It's about a girl who works in a in a funeral home, and her job is to she makes up the bodies in preparation for a funeral. So she'll, like, put their makeup on and do their hair and stuff before there's, like, an open casket funeral. Now, set in Australia, what happens is her mother is killed, or her mother dies actually very unexpectedly. She has no idea how to cope with this, even though she literally, like, works in the business of death, I guess. And then she ends up leaving where she lives, which I think is in Queensland, and going to Tasmania, which is the state that I'm from. And she goes to stay with her biological dad, and she basically ends up getting really involved in the BDSM community, kind of as a way.
Chris's face.
Yeah, you don't remember me talking about this book? It's wild.
No, I don't.
Oh, this book is wild, mate. You have to read it. You would love this. And so she sort of has no idea how to deal with her, like, horrible grief, her feelings, and so she just ends up getting really involved in BDSM and just kind of agreeing to everything as a way to try and feel something that's different. And I really loved it. It's quite a controversial book, I think, because it's got the sex is quite graphic in it. There's a lot of, like, things that happen to her that are quite grey in terms of consent, because she sort of vaguely goes along with things. She's not super clear to people. I nominated it for my book club, actually, which they were horrified about, but it was really, really interesting, the discussion, and actually everyone really liked it in the end. So it's the sort of book that you would never probably read if you're in a nice book club, unless some deranged person in the book club makes you do it. But they really liked it. And it's a really, really interesting look at how different people cope with grief, because obviously everyone in her family they all cope in different ways, but then they're also trying to run a funeral home. So while everyone's sort of coping with this, there's other people and other dead bodies. So it's kind of a little bit comical in that way, where they're just sort of trying to manage everything properly and not mess up their business, but everyone's also brokenhearted. So I loved it. I thought it was really fantastic.
Yeah, I really want to read this.
It's funny. It's that kind of really dark, macabre kind of. I find it really funny. I thought it was hilarious. I don't know. Maybe not everyone would find it funny, but I found it very funny. Do you want to do your number one, Chris?
Indeed, I will. My number one is The Devourers by Indra. Now, I just want to add a caveat to this, though. I feel like my number one book of the year really is The Last Days by Millar, but I have talked about it so much. I feel like if I spend any more time talking about it, I'm going to lose my mind. Everyone has heard me talk about it. Go check out my interview with her on my channel. Blah, 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 blah. It's a good book. But the one that really blew me away at the end of the year was The Devourers by Indra, which is a fantasy book, but it feels... I guess I was expecting it to be much more kind of genre heavy than it is, because it was published by Del Rey, but it really reads like something that would be published more by Tin House or Coffee House. It's very literary, it's very beautifully written, it's very character focused, and it opens up. It's such a weirdly structured book, and it's very layered with a whole bunch of different subplots. So it opens up following the perspective of a guy named Alok, who is living in Calcutta, India, and he is at a music festival one day when he steps outside for a smoke break and meets a man who just kind of casually tells him that he's half werewolf. And this guy starts kind of revealing his story to him, and he's a very kind of seductive kind of figure. And slowly Alok is kind of drawn into this guy, and the guy finally gives Alok this set of manuscripts that he wants him to transcribe. And the manuscripts describe these shapeshifters who lived in Calcutta centuries ago, and kind of the history and mythology of these shapeshifters. And the one shapeshifter that you're following is a man named Fenrir, who is from the north, somewhere in Norway, finds himself in Calcutta with these traveling companions. He's much more drawn to humans as being more than just prey, and trying to kind of reconcile his own human identity with humans. But this kind of obsession with it leads him to raping a woman. And then most of the rest of the book is told from the perspective of the woman that he raped, who goes on a vengeance quest against him. And so it's got all these different stories. You jump back and forth between Alok and this werewolf that he's met, who doesn't really reveal his name, and jumping back in time and reading this history and how these things all interconnect and stuff. And so it feels a little bit almost kind of like David Mitchell-esque, I guess, with all these different things. And it's just a really interesting book about queerness and shapeshifting, what it means when you have these two identities that live inside of you. One that you're supposed to find horrific and ferocious and beastly, in which you can't erase from yourself. It is just kind of present and there. And what happens when communities are built around this, and what predation looks like, and all these different things, right? I mean, it's so fascinating, and it's a book that really doesn't shy away from some of the more grotesque elements of what a werewolf that eats humans would do, It really kind of relishes in disgusting you with this really beautiful language. There's a lot of talk of piss and shit and blood and offal and all this different stuff, while at the same time being quite beautiful. So it kind of mixes that boundary really well as you're reading it. And it's just a very exciting book as you're reading. It's really propulsive, and I just loved it. And I thought the ending was completely brilliant. And I think that if you're interested in maybe a new take on the idea of shapeshifters, it's definitely worth the read.
Yeah, this sounds really interesting. I'd never heard of this before until I heard you mention it. Where did you hear about this?
Honestly, I think that I had seen it on Twitter a while ago. I just remember seeing the cover of the book and finding the cover quite beautiful. I never even really looked into what the book was about until I was at the local used bookstore one day and saw it on the shelf, and I was like, I've seen that book on Twitter. Read the back of the book, and I was like, well, hell, that sounds really interesting. And then I read the first couple pages of the bookstore and was totally blown away by the writing style. There's a certain element of it as well, and I'm not the only one that has remarked on this, that reminds you a little bit of Interview with the Vampire. So yeah, I really liked it.
I've never seen it. I must live under a rock, but I'm very happy there.
Okay, so my number one is, and I don't know whether I'm biased because it's like the last book I finished last year. It's This Much Is True by Miriam Margolyes. I'm pretty sure we talked about her in an episode this year, either a main episode or a bonus episode, and I said how much I enjoyed. Oh yes, it was the Q&A, because it was who you'd want like a guest at a dinner party or something. I said Miriam Margolyes because she's outrageous. Coincidentally, her memoir came out this year and I really, really enjoyed it. She is outrageous. She's completely outspoken. She always speaks her mind. If you're a prude, I really wouldn't read this. As we know, I am not. And even at times I was like, Miriam, blimey. She talks a lot about sucking men off, and considering she's a lesbian and she's never had sex with a man, I was quite surprised. And it happens on more than one occasion, and one particular incident was really quite explicit and I couldn't quite believe it. So yeah, that's your warning. If you don't like sexual content, you won't enjoy this one. But she's really funny. She's had a really interesting life. She grew up in a Jewish family, so she talks a lot about anti-Semitism and her links with the Holocaust and that kind of thing. She also shares sort of tidbits of her acting jobs. So she's very well known for being in Harry Potter, playing Professor Sprout. She's not particularly glowing about that film franchise, so that's quite interesting. My favourite film of all time is Romeo and Juliet, and she plays Juliet's maid. Let's call her a maid. And it's really funny because she's really good at accents. So I think she's meant to be Venezuelan or something in it, and she puts on this accent, and she talks a lot about roles that she's played where she really shouldn't have played them, and in the current day, like, she wouldn't be asked to play them because she talks about having to black up to play some of the roles that she's done. But yeah, she's just fascinating. The reason I liked her talking about Romeo and Juliet is because she talks about Leonardo DiCaprio and how they used to go antique shopping together. And there's always been rumours around Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes really not liking each other. And she kind of dishes the tea on all of that.
She wouldn't give a shit, I can imagine.
She doesn't care. She doesn't care
No.
who she upsets. I hadn't realised she went to Cambridge, so she was in they call the Footlights. Yeah, and she's very scathing of the Monty Python lot, because that was who was there when she was there. I'm sure John Cleese is no surprise, but the rest of them as well. I think there was one that she said was nice, and the rest of them are all awful. So yeah, she doesn't hold back. She's very explicit, and it's quite funny because we talked about her appearances on Graham Norton, and it's quite funny because she talks about her wife, who I hadn't realised was Australian. So Miriam Margolyes had lived in Australia quite a lot of her life. And her wife had said, you really can't just write a book like your appearances on Graham Norton. People are actually going to want to know about your life and not just hear the smut that you come out with. So, yeah, she's really funny. I really enjoyed it. And she narrates the audiobook. If you go and look at the reviews, they're very mixed. But I think that's mainly because she really doesn't hold back. So if you're not a fan of hers, you're not going to be having read this book, let's put it that way.
I could easily listen to her for hours. She's like one of my absolute favorite people to listen to. She is hilarious. One of the most naturally funny, shocking people. She is glorious.
She's great. I think you'd love
quite
it.
a lot of Australian TV, and because she'll do those kind of like lifestyle, like travel shows sometimes, or like food shows where they get taken around and given food, and she just makes these flyaway comments. She's like, "Oh, we would in this country, like you people."
She is quite scathing of Australia.
Yeah, but she lives there.
I know.
Oh my god.
She's so funny in Graham Norton when she's on with the guy, one of the stars, I think, of Mamma Mia 2, I think, and she doesn't realise that he was on it, and then Graham brings it up.
Yes, it's so funny.
And she's like, "Oh, why are we talking about that film? That was a dreadful film." Because she doesn't realise it. He's literally sitting there, the actor. And then she's like, "Oh, were you in that? I'm sorry."
She doesn't even say sorry. She's like, "Well, it was dreadful."
Yeah. Oh yeah, she doesn't. She's actually really good friends with Graham Norton in real life. So she recounts this time where I think they were queuing to go and watch a play, and she let out the biggest fart ever. It's just like, Miriam. Yeah, so it's really good. It's really funny. If you haven't watched her on Graham Norton, like I think all three of us have probably seen all the clips of her and Graham Norton. So
Every clip I can find.
Yeah, she does recount some stories on there that I've already heard, but I mean, if you haven't heard them before, you just wouldn't believe them. So yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes actually to one of her. They're on YouTube. You can watch them. So that was your number one, Jen. Chris's number one was the Devourers. Oh, so it's just me. So my number one of last year was Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down, which I think I read at the beginning of the year. This is another Australian novel, and this one won the Miles Franklin, which is basically like the Australian Booker. It starts with a woman opening up her Facebook page, I think, and she has a message request from someone, and they say, "Oh, hello, I think we used to know each other a long time ago. This is in relation to a missing person that I think we both know. And I just wondered if you had any information about this woman. I don't know if you know where she is, or she's been missing for a long time, I think 20 or 30 years, and we're trying to find her." And she completely panics because it turns out she is this woman and she's been hiding for 20 or 30 years. She really panics that someone has found her. And then it goes back in time. This is actually happening in the US, and then it goes back in time to when she was a child in Australia and what actually happened, the events that led up to her completely hiding herself and changing her identity and moving to the US. And it all starts with her basically having a really horrible childhood and moving through the foster care system in Australia. And it's kind of an examination of the foster care system and what happens to her and how she's just moved around and how ineffective it is and how it affects her in the long term. It really is incredible. If you're interested in writing at all, or if you're interested in writing a book, or if you appreciate good writing, this book is like a masterclass in how to write a mood and how to write a character, because Jennifer Down has like such tight control over the narrative and over the voice, the way that she like paces it, the way that she controls how the character thinks, the main character, and what she says. She's able to portray so much of this woman's suffering without having to actually go through, a lot of writers are like, oh, this horrible thing happened and I'm going to describe it to you in great detail. She doesn't do any of that. She describes like the consequences of what has happened. So the things that happen to her, like she gets abused, this is not actually detailed. What is actually detailed is how she doesn't think through situations properly and how she can't make relationships properly and like the kind of consequences of it. And it's very like showing, not telling, about like what has happened to her, and all of the horrible things that happened to her are just kind of dropped in as she kind of thinks about them, but it's not super graphic. It's a really, really, really impressive bit of writing. And I think it's the only book I read last year where you get that feeling that you get occasionally when you're reading a book where you can't stop reading, and if you do stop reading, you sort of feel like you're in another like weird world and you're like, oh, I just want to finish that. I don't know where I am. You're reading a book and you have to make dinner or something, and your partner or whatever is like, what are we having for dinner? And you're like, dinner? what? Like, I've got no idea. And then you live in that kind of weird, like, you get that book hangover. This is the only book last year that gave me that. It's really, really incredible.
I've been wanting to read this ever since you talked about it, and I do not understand why it takes so much to get an Australian book published in the US.
I know. It's crazy.
It's ridiculous. I mean, this thing has won so many awards. It is clearly an incredible piece of art, and it just cannot get published in the US. And Australia in particular, it's like, I don't know, it takes like an act of God to get an Australian novel published over here.
Yeah, it's true. It's like the threshold must be incredibly high. I don't know why, because also this is set partly in the US, so I don't know. Not that it has to be set in the US to appeal to a US publisher, but you know what I mean. It's not like...
Yeah.
I used to think that like anything that won an Australian prize would get published in the US automatically, but no. Not true at all.
It's really ridiculous.
I think it's out in the UK.
Yeah, I think it is out in the UK. I think I saw it. Oh, it's coming out in the US in July, it tells me, this year. Hey. I'm looking on Barnes & Noble's website.
Yeah, well, the one, I know, that's what it's kind of showing on Barnes & Noble as well. But if you look at the publisher, I have never heard of that publisher in my life. So I don't know what in the world is going on there.
Who is it? I can't even see it.
Text Publishing Company.
Oh, they are Australian.
Yeah, I don't know if that just means we'll be able to get a paperback imported into Barnes & Noble is what I'm assuming that means, because I don't think that's an American publisher.
No, they're definitely Australian. They're the original publishers of it. That is a shame. Yeah, because it's won the Miles Franklin, and it was shortlisted for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other awards. I mean, come on.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing.
Same sometimes with Canadian books. It's amazing. Things will like win the Scotia Giller Prize and still not get published in the US.
I especially find anything First Nations writers or anything in Canada is really hard to find any like shipping or anything. So yeah, sorry to recommend such a difficult to find book, but if you can get it, it's fucking brilliant.
It's probably on Book Depository.
Yeah, I'm looking on Blackwell's. You can get it on Blackwell's. Oh, Sarah Moss wrote a book called Bodies of Light. Rude. It's not by Sarah Moss.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can find on Waterstones. Maybe it isn't published in the UK.
It looks like on Book Depository it will be available on July 11th, 2023, but it's going to cost 31 American dollars.
Yeah, it's 40 fucking euros here. Oh, come on, Australia.
You need to call up those publishers and be like, hello, as an Australian like representative to the book world, this is getting ridiculous.
I'll say Sarah from the Bookcast Club here. I'm sure you know who I am.
Yeah. It sounds brilliant. By hell or high water, I will find a way to get my hands on that book.
But you also recommend a lot of fantasy books that are really hard for me to get.
I do, yeah. So it's fair is fair.
We all have a cross we must bear, you know?
I mean, it's not like I don't have like 600 unread books waiting for me in the meantime. Yeah.
I also love the drama of you being like, but then I won't have anything to read.
That's how I feel.
So that's it. Jen and I are going to do a Patreon episode, which is about our reading goals. But do you want to share your reading goals, Chris, for 2023? Have you thought about them? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're not putting me on the spot at all, because I've definitely thought about this. I mean, the biggest thing, of course, is to reduce the physical TBR. It is an overwhelming amount of books that I own right now. The other thing is just kind of fixing my attention span. I am hopelessly addicted to Twitter, which anybody who follows me knows tragically that I am like the most chronically online Twitter person ever, and it has like affected my attention span and my ability to kind of like sit with a book. So I really just wanted to focus on like kind of finding that happy focused time with reading again, that seemed to come so naturally to me just a few years ago, and just kind of reducing the physical TBR. So I want to use my public library more. That way I'm not like just constantly buying a book every time it sounds interesting. And like I'm a part of 2 library systems, one gigantic library system that encompasses over 34 individual branches of the library. So like I should have no problem finding books from the library, but I just kind of always forget that like that's available. So yeah, I use my library more, reduce the physical TBR, and find that focused reading time again. I'm fortunately going to be on night shift here soon, which I'm really excited about. And I actually think that's going to help my reading, because the way it's ultimately going to work out is basically I'll have more free time than I currently do at my current job, because I'll have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off of work. So I'm really hoping that will help me as well. Yeah,
I guess you'll also have your evenings and mornings will be a bit different to everyone else, so you might be a bit more free.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Quickly, can I ask, are we doing numbers? Remember last year you had a very specific numbers plan.
I put on my Goodreads goal 200 books.
Okay. Have you got a reduction of TBR, like number goal?
I would like to reduce my TBR by 200. That's really why I put the 200 on the Goodreads thing. Is not really because I think I'm going to read 200 books, but just to kind of remind myself to like try and get the TBR down by 200. Be that by DNFing, culling, whatever. Especially because I'm probably going to be moving at some point this year. And moving this many books, not fun.
Yeah, definitely. I want to halve my physical TBR, but I won't tell you how big it is because you'll get angry at me.
How big is it?
Oh, like 50.
Oh, I can half your TBR in a day.
I know. You're like, fuck off. Whatever, we'll save the rest for the Patreon episode. So yeah, Jen and I will be doing a Patreon episode about our reading plans, but we didn't invite Chris to that party, so you don't get to hear from him. So that's it. The only other thing that we had to say is that Alice is not going to be in the podcast very much this year because she's super busy at the moment. So she will be back in a couple of months here and there. But something she is doing that's really cool is she's actually going to run the London Marathon this year, and she's running it for a charity called Mind, which is a mental health charity, right, Jen?
Yeah.
So if you want to support her, we will leave the link in the show notes to her little donation page if you want to support her running the marathon, and if you want to follow her like running life, you can follow her on her private Instagram or her like personal Instagram, and then she keeps you up to speed with her. Up to speed.
Good one.
With her new running lifestyle. Thank you. So Alice won't be around until after the marathon's finished, I think. So it will be a couple of months. So those were each of our top 3 books for 2022. We hope you got some recommendations out of us there. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have questions, ideas, feedback, recommendations, anything like that, you can email us at thebookcastclub@outlook.com. You can also contact us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Bookcast Club on both of those. And a reminder to sign up to our newsletter if you want more reviews, podcast recommendations, and all kinds of podcast updates. And also you can check out our Patreon if you would like to support us even further. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk at you again in 2 weeks. Bye!